Welcome back, guys, for another episode of Team Building with Jam. And we're going to be building around Gallade today. I'm going to hop right into it. Now, before I do, you can see the team is already built. I noticed that I probably have to go over at least some stuff repeatedly. So stuff for those who've been with me for a while or who've seen the previous editions of this and already know the process. What I'm going to end up doing is not harping as much on it because that can become redundant for those who see these all the time, right? You know the steps, and so I'm going to just briefly mention it. And for those who have further questions, let's say that this is your first time watching it, then just leave a comment down below and I'll happily respond. Or, those who y'all have been dope, those who are in the comments who, if I don't get to it, sometimes 8-10 people have already gotten to that answer already for the person I'm requesting. So it's a very helpful community. We're all about speed, getting you where you want to be in the shortest time possible, and support, which is community, right? So since we're building around Gallade today, the first thing I had to identify, step number one of every team building, is identify the objective. And so Gallade is an offensive Pokemon, meaning it's going to be a part of your offensive core. Now, the first thing after you identify the goal, want to win with Gallade, you can sometimes determine the set ahead of time. For me, I said, okay, I wanted to go with the agility version, right? I wanted to boost speeds and sweep opponents, right? So we're gonna then ask, step number two, check what Pokemon or strategies would stop you from your goals. So what you do is say, okay, after Gallade sets up, right, what can stop it? And so you'd go through the tier that it's in, right? You guess you can go to, Pokemon that aren't used that much in the tier you're playing, but you want to start with your tier and focus there. So after Gallade sets up, it beats Amoonguss. It can beat a Azumarill. Aqua Jet can hurt you. It can beat Breloom, assuming not Sash. Scarlet, Shiempa can Sucker Punch you, so you're going to be careful of that. Or Ice Shard is going to do a lot. Beats Cinderace, beats Clodsire. With some damage, it beats Corviknight, but Corviknight can stop you. With some damage, it can beat Dondozo, but Dondozo can stop you. It kills Dragapult. Dragonite can stop you with some damage. Espathra, not so much, but kind of, if you're not careful. But not really. Garchomp, depending on the set, because actually Sacred Sword, especially with Terrify, I think Terra Fighting one-shots. Offensive Garchomp. Garg, if it's Terra Fairy, can stop you, or some bulky variant. If it's in its rock form, obviously you can just destroy it with Sacred Sword. Goldengo, if it's at full or Terras, can potentially stop you, but Night Slash does quite a bit. We're using Sharpness today, which makes all these moves very strong. Glamora dies, Tusk needs some damage but dies, Greninja dies, Grimmsnarl, screens, but it would die. Hatterene does stop you. You need quite a bit of damage on Hatterene. Iron Moth doesn't. Threads dies. Valiant dies. Gambit dies. Meowscarada dies. Earthworm dies. I always call it Earthworm, and I'm going to continue. Pelipper dies after some damage, Quaquaval dies. Roaring Moon dies. Rotom after some damage can die, but that does stop you. Scizor does stop you, but can die if, that's why we have Psychic Terrain. I will get into that. Skeledirge needs quite a bit of damage, but can die. Tinglu, some damage and dies. So everybody can die versus this thing. So the question is, now that we've identified that I want agility sweep, what's next? You check what Pokemon. So the Pokemon I've singled out that are most important to do something about are Corviknight, Dondozo, Garganacl, Hatterene, and Rotom, right? And so I say, okay. We then are usually you'd go into the damage calculator and you go, okay, I have you're going to load up the set you have. So let's say you have a Gallade, right? And so you load up the set that you have. I just put OU Swords Dance. It's the same set, right? So we'll put Night Slash just so you have all the moves so you know what you're working with. And then you'd put in the Pokemon that give you trouble. So Corviknight, why are you doing this? Because you want to know exactly, you want to leverage the calc to get knowledge. You want to know exactly how much you can expect to do with Sacred Sword does 53 to 63, which means for you to, this isn't with assuming no Terra Fighting. With Terra Fighting, you do 71 to 84 to max Corviknight. That's insane. That isn't right. That's max, which is rare. But well, I wouldn't say rare, but you know, most Corviknight have some mixture of defenses. So, but you want to prepare for the worst case scenario. And so you'd go, okay, I'm expected to do about 53 to 63, so I need to figure out a way to get Corviknight to that amount of health before I set up, right? Then you'd put in the next thing. Let's say Dondozo. How much do I need Dondozo to be at? And you want to prepare for the worst case scenario, or like the common set. So it's not uncommon for Dondozo to have max. So you're like, okay, how much does Sacred Sword do? It does 40 minimum to about 47. With Terra Fighting, it does about half. Yeah, it does 53 to 62. So you're like, okay, I need to get Dondozo to around this amount of health before I start trying to sweep. Or kill it completely, obviously. What about Garganical? Then you'd go to Garganical next and figure out what does that do. So you put in the most typical set, which is the Stealth Rock one. And you see, okay, with Sharpness, it after rocks it dies. Psycho Cut not so much. With the terrain, it does about half. And so this is assuming it's a fairy type or water, whatever it wants to do. Anything that is neutral to your hits. So you need to get Garganical below half essentially before you try to sweep. Right, sure, Garganical can't do much back to you, but between the Salt Cures, the Protects, before you know your Gallade is gone, right? And that's not what you want. Once you set up, you want to blow through the opponent. So next is going to be Hatterene. You want to go through that and say, okay, what's the obstacle, right? I've determined my objective. What's the obstacle? And so you go to Hatterene. What's the most common set? That's it. You're going to see your strongest move versus that is going to be Night Slash. So you need to get Hatterene at 40% or below before you can try to sweep with Gallade, right? And then lastly is going to be Rotom. Well, not lastly, there are other little mons, but these are the most common things that are going to be impediments, and you're going to see on a lot of teams that stop Rotom. So Rotom Wash these days are physically defensive for, say, Dragonites and other strong water types like Quickleval and Great Tusks and things of that nature. So you're going to see max Rotom for the most part. You want to see how much you're doing. So Sacred Sword does a lot. It does 70 minimum. So you really only need to get Rotom to 70%, which isn't going to be difficult. So now that you know what calcs you need, so remember, step 1 is identify the goal. Step 2 is to check what Pokemon and strategies would stop you after your agility. Then you're going to do, okay, what Pokemon can help me solve that? So we only looked at the defensive solutions to Gallade, but we kind of touched on the offensive one, namely priority, right? So it might not, for example, Xianpao cannot take a Sacred Sword, but if Xianpao attacks my Gallade with the ever so common Choice Banded set, Xianpao's Choice Banded set, we want to see how much is that going to do, right? Because remember, your agility and your life orb, so you want to use, you want to take as little damage as possible. So Ice Shard, the Psychic Terrain is up. Ice Shard almost kills me. Ice Shard from your typical Xianpao does 70 to 82%. And not to mention if you don't terrestrialize, assuming it's banded, right? It's banded, doesn't run Sucker Punches often, but you die. Or if it's not banded and it's just heavy duty boots, let's just use a heal ball there. You almost die to Sucker Punch, and Ice Shard still does about half. We don't want those problems, right? Especially from something so common, and so that's one problem. Secondly, we're gonna check for Dragonite, right? Another common Pokemon is Dragonite with Terra Normal Extreme Speed, right? So you're gonna be max. How much does Terra Normal Extreme Speed do? It almost kills you. We don't want those problems, because then you only get 1 bit of damage and then your Gallade's done for. So that's another offensive check. King's Gambit's probably another one, especially if you start destroying all of his team. King Gambit's probably not gonna take King Gambit. I don't know. It's Kin Gambit. Actually, it's Kin Gambit. We've been saying this wrong the whole time because they're not 2 G's. It's Kin Gambit or King Ambit. But what's wrong with me? Nothing. So we King's Gambit with the typical set. No allies fainted, almost kills you. And then if you you knock out 3 of his boys, you're done for in this town. So that's something you don't want. So those are what's called offensive threats. And then obviously you have your Scizors, which aren't as common, but it's something you want to account for. choice bandit scissor probably almost kills you with bullet punch. Yep. And so we don't want those problems. We don't want those problems. So we want to knock things out. And so this is where I had to think this through, in the sense that there are a couple ways we could solve those problems, and that's the beauty of team building. However, for the sake of creativity and, again, not using the same team again and same strategies again, I decided to try out Psychic Terrain. Psychic Terrain blocks all priority, so, and it powers up Psycho Cut for Gallade. So while Indeedee isn't the best Pokemon in the tier, or in the game rather, I think it's what, NU maybe, I don't know, it's UU actually. We're going to be using it to help Gallade up, because it can set the Psychic Terrain up and protect it. Also has cool moves like Encore, and it can Calm Mind and such, so not awful. So with Indeedee running loose, what can we do? It's merely there to support Gallade. So the Psychic Terrain solved one of our problems, which are offensive checks. So now how do we solve defensive problems? So of all the Pokemon that we listed, 3 of them, Dondozo, Garganacl, and Hatterene, are all grounded. And so hazards come to mind. Okay, how do we get damage on those monsters so that we can kill them? Hazards, right? Now, 2 of those Pokemon on the list can get rid of hazards, meaning Corviknight and Garganacl. Corviknight and Hatterene, rather. So I went, okay, what Pokemon can get up hazards, and those Pokemon don't enjoy coming in on them? Now, there are a couple. We could have went with Garchomp. We could have went with, offensive Garchomp obviously can do a lot of damage to every Pokemon we just listed. As far as stopping hazards from coming up, we could have used maybe an offensive Great Tusk, or just Great Tusk in general was annoying. We could have tried out a Kingambit, all these things, right? I decided to go with Meowscarada, mainly because it baits in a lot of those Pokemon, mainly Hatterene and Corviknight, and knocks their item off, which moves us closer to our goal. Mainly Hatterene. What the beauty of Meowscarada is that if the opponent has a Hatterene and you use knockoff, that's because they're like, well, I don't want the hazards going up, right? That's the point of having a Hatterene. You don't want hazards going up. So knockoff will likely do maybe 40% or so, and then you get to U-turn the next turn. And so the Hatterene is already in range of Gallade from just 2 turns versus the Meowscarada. It's already in range of the Gallade. So that's something you want to have on hand and handy and all the things, right? So that being said, Meowscarada is Flower Trick, okay. But that being said, we went with Meowscarada here as an offensive hazard stacker. Now, you could argue this is the offensive core, but kind of not, right? It's not. These aren't the strongest mons, and Gallade really needs a lot of support for it to sweep. Are you only going to use Gallade under agility? Of course not. There are times where you can, U-turn out. If Meowscarada also pairs well because it baits in things like Toxapex as their defensive checks, Kingambit. It likes to bait in bulky steels, right? Bulky steels are bulky grass types, like Amoonguss, things of that nature. And if you U-turn on an Amoonguss, guess who gets to come in and hammer people? Yep, your boy Gallade. So it's a good pairing, right? There are several ways you can go about it, and I always emphasize that in team building. There are a million ways to go about configuring this, and the team is just at the beginning. So I said I wouldn't rehash things that I've said in several videos, but also it's a balance of considering those who are watching this for the first time. So the third step, as I said, identify what Pokemon solve these problems. So we already solved one problem of how are we going to weaken these Pokemon so Gallade can sweep, and how are we going to protect our Gallade once it's set up. And so the next things are like, how do we not get swept by the common Pokemon in the tier, right? Because Gallade, while it's solid, it's not top cut for a reason, right? Needs a lot of support to do work. And so our team still has to have a backbone structure that's solid enough to where we're not, if our strategy fails, which is oftentimes what people do, they go gung-ho on a strategy that's kind of gimmicky. It's the difference between a gimmick and an actual solid team, is that once the opponent sees the gimmick once, or the gimmick doesn't work, their team falls apart, because all of the team is designed for that one thing to work, and work once in most cases. But I like to structure teams in a way for 2 reasons. One, just my general play style. Right? I don't like to lose to matchup where I just go into a game and I just can't win, right? Because the matchup is versus something that's common, which is If you're losing versus the number one used mon on the ladder, for example, it's not the team. It's not the Pokemon. It's the team, right? And so that's the one reason. The second reason, I don't remember what I even just said, so I don't remember the second reason. So we're gonna move forward. And then number 4, right? So we're gonna put together some things. So why did I pick Toxapex next? A Covert Cloak, right? Goldengo was an option here that I tried to fit, right? But I'm faced with 2 problems in the sense that I don't want to use the same Pokemon I use every video. I've said that before. So if I was building a Gallade team to make Gallade the best possible mon, I could. The team would look very different. But obviously then I'm going to be using the top Pokemon. The top Pokemon are on every team, right? And there are very few Pokemon in the OU tier as is, so we don't want to keep rehashing. So let's keep injecting creativity into it. So Toxapex is something that covers many mons in one, right? So at this point we're like, okay, well these aren't the strongest thing. Gallade is, but you know, Gallade isn't able to switch it on things, and like, how do we get the Gallade in on a frequent basis, right? So Pex covered, because I was trying to fit Goldengo, which would have helped support. It would cover Garganical. It would just do, you know, spin blocking. It would defog block for our spikes, because you don't want your Psychic Terrain defog or your spikes, and I'm aware of that. And so I was like, Goldengo just makes too much sense. But if I fit Goldengo in, the only way I was gonna be able to keep a decent structure with hazard control, rocks, and not losing to common things like Volk would be to use a team structure that is very similar to what I've used before, right? And so as far as the last 3, and so to avoid that and give you guys some spikes while still maintaining a decent defensive core, I decided to go with Pex, which kind of catch-alls a lot of things, not everything, but catch-alls enough things. I decided to go with Pex, Tusk, which is a common one, right? Why do we always use Tusk? Tusk 1 is the number 1 used Pokemon in the tier. That's like asking why do we use Landorus Therian. But primarily Tusk is used because it compresses a lot of roles in one, right? It gives you hazard control, which is very important in today's metagame, right? That's why I typically have it. And it allows for somebody who's picking this team up to not just get bombarded. You know, sure, at a higher skill level you can figure out a way to maneuver around hazards, but you got to account that you got to factor in the fact that those who are watching this video are going to range from just starting to, you know, top of the ladder. And so we want to make sure that the team can function no matter where the person chooses to use it. So rather than doubling down and say, well, you should outplay, right, and give them a bad team or a very tailored team to your skill set, you want to give them a team that's that can function no matter where they are. And then you can go in and make the alterations, because the team is never done until we test it. So Tusk is going to be there. Tusk is another mon like Pex. It just compresses a lot of things in one row. Spin, hazards potentially, and a lot of the check to many defensive mons that would run over you otherwise, you know, namely the Gambits opposing Tusk. Gambit opposing Tusk. What was the other thing? And just there's something else. Cinderace. There we go. Cinderace. And it also gives you something that's pretty important that we never think about, because we think, okay, well, it's weak to the other one, but dark resist, right? Most people have a Tusk also because it's a Xianpao crunch stitching. Otherwise, you're getting crunched up no matter what your mons are, right? So Tusk, phenomenal for that. It forces Xianpao to have to predict, because Xianpao likes using Terra Dark Crunch to just shoot through your team, which is why it's being suspected. So Tusk just puts a lot of value into one Pokemon. So we have it again. Now, last mon, when I had these two, I was like, okay, right? Because I could have compressed Rotom and then switched out this, or I could have. There are a lot of different combos I tried. And obviously, a lot of this is being restricted by Indeedee's existence, right? Indeedee just really is there for Psychic Terrain, and so with Indeedee removed, which you guys can choose to do, and say, you know, go for dual screens with Grimmsnarl, things of that nature, which would bring a lot of freedom to the other slots. I just decided to keep things cool, keep things fun, and we're gonna apply Psychic Terrain here. And so Great Tusk, The last slot is going to be Corviknight, right? Why is Corviknight? It's sub bulk up Corviknight, right? You could have gotten U-turn. Obviously, it would be unwise to use Defog. Defog is not as reliable with Goldengo around. So it's like, okay. And you don't want to get rid of your terrain and your hazard, so you wouldn't go Defog. So I would go bulk up, right? Similarly to Gallade, when I think about what stops bulk up, these two actually can support each other handsomely. How is that? Well, Corviknight usually is going to struggle with things like unaware mons when it's sort of worrying about bulk up or hazers. So things like Dondozo, really Dondozo, Skeledirge, and not really Clodsire, because obviously Clodsire can't touch it and Braver does a lot. So it really is Dondozo and Skeledirge. Rotom kind of loses 1v1. But yeah. She didn't put the Terra types in. So Fairy there. There's a case for both Water and Fire. Since we have picks, Fire is usually there for Volcarona. Keep the Terra Grass because you want that power trick at some points. Fairy, in case you want to turn to a Fairy type in fighting, so that your Sacred Swords are blowing through things. And it also gives you an additional, in case you need to take a Sucker Punch against rid of your Psychic typing. But yeah, so Bulk Up Corviknight is one of those rogue, not even rogue, I wouldn't say it's rogue, it's just one of those underrated run upon you mon that if you're not careful you will be swept swiftly, very swiftly. And many pecks aren't even running haze these days, which is one of the bigger issues. But Gallade lures in things like Dondozo, as we said, and Skeledirge, and so sometimes you may trade your Gallade in exchange for the Dondozo or for the Skeledirge. That way your Corviknight can just bulk up and sweep, right? Or vice versa. Though Corviknight's not really ever getting through Dondozo or Skeledirge and whatnot. Sure, it can maybe pressure stall, but that's beyond, that's about it. I don't know what I was trying to say there. That's about it. Now, as far as Terra types, in Corviknight's case, it's actually an interesting thing, right? Could opt for normal, you could opt for actually Fire, right? Fire would allow you to beat the ever so common Bulk Up Volk, Quiver Dance, Volk without worrying about getting burnt. It would allow you to beat this thing, right? Because pressure is such a phenomenal ability. The other side of normal is that normal is only weak to fighting, and because you're bulking up, most fighting moves in the tier are going to be physical. Obviously, be careful of Sacred Sword, but most fighting types and normal, just as a typing, it's very good. Not defensively in like it resists things, though Ghost is going to be important, as you'll see. Not that it resists things per se, but it's just not weak to a lot. So if you don't have a strong fighting type that won't die, my flying type obviously, then normal is very good. And one of the other benefits, what's a very common stop to a bulk up Corviknight if you were to think about it, right? Somebody may say, well, shit, I'm going to my Goldengo. The beauty of that is when you Terra normal, the Goldengo can no longer hit your Shadow Ball and can only go for Make It Rain. Why is that a good thing for you? Because Make It Rain only has 4 PP, and so the only way it'll be able to break your sub is with Make It Rain. Because of pressure, it only has 4 PP. It has 8, and so it'll actually never be able to touch you because you'll never go from not being behind a sub, right? You sub, he tries to nasty plot. As long as you're behind a sub, he can't go for Make It Rain, right? And you waste all the Make It Rain PP. And so once that's done, he obviously can't touch you. You don't have to worry about split F drops. Shadow Ball is the one move in the tier from Dragapult and such. At that point, Dragapult can only touch you with this Draco Meteor. Max split F Corviknight takes nothing from that. And it obviously drops the special attack. So that's the reason why normal, there are cases for Dragon. Dragon helps, as you said, fire, things of that nature, because Dragon resists, water, fire, grass, things of that nature. Volt switch from Rotom. And so your sub would never be broken, though with Terra normal it wouldn't be broken anyway. And then that would allow you to stall out Dondozo's Wave Crash and stuff, but that's a really stally situation. Taunt is also an option over Substitute, but Substitute prevents shenanigans like the Will-O-Wisps and the taunts and the, well, maybe not taunt, but you know, things of that nature. It does stop hazers, but you do get worn down by status. So that's gonna be our skeleton. We managed to get this done in 25 minutes, which is beautiful. I have my piece of paper out. I was like, we're going to keep this. Now it does miss out a lot of, it's very straightforward and it doesn't show a lot of my creative process going through it. However, I think as I said, we're going to supplement that with the comment section. So if you guys have any questions, leave them down below. I also have Gallade's one of those mods I think I'll just be playing with. It's just a lot. It seems like a lot of fun. I also have a skeleton structure for sticky web, right? I think it could thrive in sticky web and maybe rock swords dance instead of agility, or just 4 attacks, right? Another move it has that's very, very, very has a lot of potential is leaf blade. You're like, oh, Jam, leaf blades, but a lot of the things that it baits in, the Gargs, the Dondozos, the Rotoms, they actually get destroyed by a leaf blade. Like, I mean, absolutely destroyed. And so you might not even need to use Gallade as something that's the primary sweeper, but it's the primary wall breaker. And so if you destroy Dondozo, then the question is, what do I open up? Right? So that may open up a Volcarona you have in the back. That may open up a Dragonite you have in the back. That may open up, you know, whatever else Dondozo would have stopped otherwise. Right? Your Espathra. No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. Or your Shimpao, right? So I'll see, right? But one team at a time. We may revisit Gallade again. But yeah, let me know what you'd like to see, what I can do better at, what you liked. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video when I uploaded this. So subscribe if you haven't. I'm going to upload a couple videos with this team testing it out. So if you want to see that, stay tuned. Live coming out today. Thanks for watching again, guys, and peace.